You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 48. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I am your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. This is the first episode of the Hello World Podcast in 2015. We're going to be changing things up a bit. We'll be releasing new episodes twice a month, on the 1st and the 15th. This episode was recorded in Vienna and Atlanta. We talked to Dave Ward, who is an independent consultant and author, specializing in projects ranging from ASP.NET to Node.js to JavaScript single-page applications and even to hybrid mobile apps. With 20 years' experience developing for the web, he has been recognized as a Microsoft Regional Director, an ASP.NET MVP, and a member of ASP Insiders. To learn more or to get in touch with Dave, you can visit his blog at encosia.com. That's ENCOSIA.com, or find him on Twitter as @Encosia. Normally, I'm in Atlanta. That's where I live and work most of the time. But since June, I've been traveling the world with my new bride. But I have a very warm place in my heart for Atlanta, and that's where this world trip will end, back in Atlanta. Dave is one of those developers I learned of in Atlanta, and I run into him here and there. He's done some work for Wilder Minds, and he runs his own consultancy, of course. I've always been very impressed with Dave, because he seems to have a really rich grasp on the entire web ecosystem. And I was really curious about how he actually started that. Is this something he's been doing for a long time, or did he move into the web fairly recently? And that's a lot of what we talked about today. We talked about his experience in the consulting realm, since that's where he does most of his work. Let's take a listen. So in today's show, I'm excited. In Atlanta, like I normally am, is Dave Ward, very famous web developer, someone who's done a lot of work, and I was interested in how he got started. So how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I assumed, like most of us, you had an Apple II growing up, and then you started doing web development before it was a public thing. Is that? Do I have that entire story correct?
Maybe like 1% of it. I did not have an Apple II. I felt left out. I never had an Apple anything until I got an iPhone, actually.
Wow.
I started with a Radio Shack TRS-80 color computer.
Very popular.
Big gray box, like the not even the pretty one that came later in the beige box, but the really old clunky one.
Before the color computer, right?
Well, it was still called a color computer, but it was, I guess they had maybe 3 different versions of it that came with different amounts of RAM and things like that.
Right.
And I had a hand-me-down from my uncle that was the very first one.
Wow.
Even back then, he was, I'm tired of this thing. It's no good. I want to get rid of it. And so that was mine.
And how old were you?
I was 5,
wow.
As best I can recall. And it was my parents. It was 100% my parents. I mean, all along the way, like the common thread was my parents were so awesome, like trying to get me this stuff to use. So like, I totally remember when I was a little kid sitting in the other room and the color computer and a bunch of cartridges and a tape drive and like some back issues of like, Coco magazine or one of those. We're sitting out on the dining room table, and my uncle and my parents were kind of like negotiating like a price for the whole package of it. So they totally were the driver of that thing, and they got it. But then, once they sat it in front of me, I was just in love with it. I was engrossed totally.
So was it a game machine, a game playing machine at first for you, or did you jump right into code?
Well, so, to me, what I wanted, was a gameplay machine. I wanted like an Atari. Yeah. And this was as close as they were going to give me, so I was going to make it work. But then, it really turned out that the only way, not the only way, but the only reasonable way, especially back then without the internet, without, any computer stores near where I lived, the only reasonable way to turn it into a game machine was to get a monthly subscription to a magazine that was full of printouts of code, and then you type all the code in yourself, and then play the game.
Wow. And hopefully get all the code right? I mean, because you spent more time proofreading than you did
absolutely.
typing.
line, 10,000 go sub. What? No, you have to start over. But yeah, so it turned out that the only way that I could play games was to, not code them at all. Of course, I didn't understand half of what I was typing, but I had to at least be exposed to the code to get it in there.
Yeah. And where did you grow up? I have this impression you didn't grow up in Atlanta.
I did not. I grew up in Georgia, but it was a really rural area in the Northeast Georgia.
Oh, okay. Up in the mountains.
Yeah, basically in Northeast Georgia.
Oh, nice. And which is why there weren't any computer stores near you, because there weren't.
Yeah, the closest one was in Athens, which was which is where University of Georgia is, and it was a larger town, and that was about an hour away from us. Wow. And then Atlanta was even farther away, where there were a few computer stores. But yeah, it was always a really fun day when we get to go to Athens, and I would get them to take me to the Radio Shack Computer Center. Remember how they had the separate Tandy Computer Center to the sides?
I remember that. I do.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was my favorite.
Yeah, I'm still surprised that Radio Shack is still a thing. When I was listening to the news today, and they were mentioning that in Berkeley, during the protests, they had broken the window of a Radio Shack. And the only part of that story that surprised me was that there was a Radio Shack in Berkeley. It just didn't make any sense to me.
To be fair, I don't think that the Radio Shack of today is even the same store. It's really a glorified cell phone store compared to what it used to be.
Absolutely. You can't even get electronic parts anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, I've gone there a couple of times looking for something really basic to fix something around the house, and they don't have it. And it's really disappointing.
It is. Our heyday, as it were. So what was the language you were typing in? Was it their version of, Tandy Basic or something like that? Yeah,
so it's shipped with Microsoft Basic on the ROM. Yeah, it was on a ROM. So as soon as you hit the power button, you're at a basic prompt, And I think that was huge. I mean, that was really key that I couldn't turn the computer on without it, shoving basically the best IDE we had at the time in my face, and saying, hey, write some code if you want to,
Yeah, that's the only way to get things going. Yeah, it's the same with, I grew up with a Commodore. And so that was my experience was of course the first thing you would do is, type 10, print hello world. I mean, that's
and 20 go to 10.
Yes, of course. Oh, I can't stop it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I eventually did have a Commodore 64 later, and yeah, exactly the same experience, and I think that was huge. If I'd grown up today with, an iPad and, a desktop computer, I can't imagine that it would be even remotely as easy to sort of get sucked into it, because it would be way easier just to spend my time playing Angry Birds than figure out how it was written.
Yeah, and sort of, finding anything like a dev tool or a command prompt is difficult or impossible. On an iPad, obviously impossible, but even on Macs and PCs today, the console or, something you can type into just isn't as, I want to type something. Let me open Word, this heavy-handed formatting engine instead of, Notepad, which I guess it still exists, but you ask the average user and they're like, no, what? So, yeah.
I'm honestly, I'm so impressed with, the people coming up today who learn HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all these technologies, something on the back end, to be able to build things. I don't know if I could have done that.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's more information on the internet, but you have to seek it out a little more. It wasn't like, let me just try this and try this and try this.
Yeah. And you have to, while you're seeking it out, see how many people are doing all these genius things, right? Instead of just being able to sort of experiment naively by yourself and no one sees you fail.
Yeah.
You have to watch people building Facebook as you're just trying to figure out how to do Hello World.
Oh, I must not know what I'm doing. So it sounds like you had different computers as you grew up. Did you know pretty early that this is what you wanted to do, or was it still sort of the sideline that enticed you?
Oh yeah, this was for me. There was absolutely no doubt. It probably helped that there wasn't much to do in rural Northeast Georgia other than what we had at the house.
Sure.
But for sure, I was hooked. I had so many computers growing up. I think relative to how many was probably normal.
Yeah.
And I was just always begging my parents for the next one, and I remember that my parents were just sort of horrified, because I think they spent maybe $500 on this sort of set of stuff for the color computer that would hook up to the TV. And within the first, think the first year, probably the first few months, I had taken it apart. And I was trying to figure out, how's this thing work? How's that thing work? And they're just like, well, they basically did the same thing you just did. They made that sound.
The fear that you won't be able to put it back together.
Well, I guess. And also that, even if it's apart and still working, that's great. But please don't break it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So,
but I was always about, just learning everything I could about them. I just enjoyed them so much.
And did is this something manifested itself in middle school and high school? Were you hanging around with the other kids that were doing this, or were you really isolated as the computer guy?
There really were no other kids that were doing this. Okay. And probably just because I was in the country and learning how to raise like goats and sheep was way more important to anyone than computer stuff, because it was still. Really, even, sure, there was some people using VisiCalc and some things like that. But for the most part, especially outside of like, really urban areas, it really wasn't considered a useful skill the entire time I was growing up.
It was just, something to entertain you.
Yeah, at best, you're playing your video games again, right? My parents weren't like that, but most people would sort of view it like that. It was just they thought about it like the same way they would think about like an arcade or something like that, not really like a productive thing. Yeah,
that's interesting. I remember, I don't know if I've told the story on the show before, but when I was, I guess 11 or 12, there was a school trip to go to DC. This was down in Florida, and my sister had gone the year before. And ever since she went, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but my grandmother would help out. And when my sister went, I started to do the calculations. I'm sure I would have made a PowerPoint presentation today, right? Because I was like, okay, for $500, I can get the Commodore 64 because I had a VIC at the time, and the hard drive. And, I'll do this instead of the trip. It's the same money. And in hindsight, my mother's like, that's the best investment we ever made, because of the $500, that she and grandma put together. My sister still doesn't remember all the things she saw at the Smithsonian, but I was able to make a living out of it. So, very good investment for the right parent.
Yeah, definitely. Especially a hard drive. That's high end.
I'm sorry.
I didn't have a hard drive until like my Amiga 3000.
I said hard drive. I meant floppy drive.
You got the big 1541 floppy drive.
1541. Yep.
Yeah.
that you could build houses with it. It was that sturdy.
You could build houses and play dubstep music on it at the same time.
I don't know if that's a good idea.
Yeah, I had a Commodore 64 later, and I had a weird disk drive, but my grandma had a Commodore 64 as well, and she had the big 1541. I remember it well.
Yeah, it was a beast. So, how did this sort of transplant you? Because you were working in different versions of BASIC, I would guess, on most of these different systems. Did you head to college after high school to do this? Did you start working? What happened?
Yeah, I went to Georgia Tech
nice.
After high school, so that's how I ended up in Atlanta. And I went for computer science because it just made sense, right? I've been doing this since I was 5. What else would actually? That's incorrect. I went for computer engineering just because I didn't really know which was which.
Right.
And my high school counselor didn't really know which was which either. So I ended up there for Compy at first and realized, no, this is like building chips. I don't want this. And ended up in computer science after 2 months.
So the computer engineering was the hardware guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's the guys. The really smart guys, guys like me, I can't do that, but I can definitely use their awesome chips to do fun things.
Yeah, that is awesome. And did you start working while you were in college, or did you go to college, full time and then do?
So actually, I was incredibly lucky, as I mentioned. I mean, it's my family all the way. I mean, when you look back at the thread of all of the sort of events that got me here, it's so much my family. And so they had a couple of small businesses when I was a kid.
Nice.
And I actually had my first real production software that I had to write and maintain and support when I was, I guess I was 13.
Wow.
To help run some of their businesses and do inventory and POS stuff for retail stores.
That's awesome.
So that was, I guess you might say that was my first real job with the software. It was,
if they called
obviously
you when it
some
broke
nepotism.
Down. Sure. But if they called you when it broke down, it was a job. That's the
yeah. I mean, I had to add features and deal with not just them, but actual real users that would not treat me quite as well as they would. And it was really, really interesting. And so I had like the inventory and like accounting and POS system that would run their retail stores.
And were these on home computers at the time?
Yeah, that was on. It was basically running off of an Amiga 3000.
Nice.
Which was my first computer with a hard drive. I thought it was amazing.
It was
like a 20 megabyte hard drive or something. 40, actually, I think. Yeah.
And just so everyone's really clear, he did say megabyte, and he was not correct.
With an M.
Yes.
So much, much smaller than like one decent sized iOS app now.
Yeah. Yeah. It would, you could fit the entire hard drive in as one app over the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time, that was gigantic. I never came close to using the whole thing.
No. Yeah, can you even imagine? And so, did you have, obviously working for your family and doing this sort of work, you didn't have the sort of rigorousness of learning software, I hate to say software engineering, but working with other developers and sort of that environment. Is that something you learned in college, or is that something that happened after college?
Yeah, I never got any of that in college, really. College was extremely useful, in terms of learning some of the theory and things where I went into it with a sort of a chip on my shoulder. Like, I've been doing this all my life. I already know this stuff, you know. I was very wrong, and there was a lot for me to learn, and I'm really glad I went. But there really wasn't much there in terms of practical application either, at least not at that time. It was all esoteric languages that were really not useful in the field. And there was nothing about, like, say, source control or, just even trying to compose a project out of parts that different people can work on easily or anything like that.
Interesting. And I know this will reveal your age, but what years were you at Georgia Tech?
94 through 98.
Really? That I thought you were that young, but when you were saying no useful languages, I kind of hoped, I guess he was there at 87 to 91 or something. But that seems awfully late to not have this sort of practicality.
Yeah, I think probably the most practical thing that I used there was definitely C. We did some C work, but it was all in the context of operating systems, like building shell. Or actually, like operating system commands and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And the only thing we did on PC really was Pascal, Turbo Pascal.
Yeah. Well, I had a friend who was a professor at Georgia State, and he was very excited about Turbo Pascal until I explained to him at the time, this is 91, that no one was writing production software in Turbo Pascal.
Yeah, it essentially might as well have been BASIC, right?
Might as well have been, yeah. I'm sure it's a great language, but...
it was definitely useful. It was a good learning tool to learn concepts, but definitely not helpful to me later on.
No. So what was your first, actual non-nepotism job like?
Well, so a friend of mine and we started a company while I was at school.
Nice.
And it was weird. For all the experience I had with computers, looking back on it historically, it's sort of easy to put it in the context of the software.
Yeah.
But I spent just as much time taking them apart and upgrading them and messing with the hardware as well. So we actually started a company doing like IT stuff, mostly networking, building computers and doing server stuff and things like that. Which we also did software in addition because people wanted it, and I could do it, and I had friends at Tech that could do it too. So that would and. Yeah, I guess you would say that was my first real job. I had some sort of stuff on the side before that, even going back earlier into high school.
Yeah. And what did you take out of that first job where you now had paying clients that expected some level of quality and responsiveness and customer service from you? Was that a little bit of a surprise?
No, I loved it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I was getting paid to do exactly what I would want to be doing if I was, independently wealthy and didn't have to work. I mean, it was great.
That's awesome. And how long did that company last?
We went down in the .com bust. A lot of our clients were directly affected by it, and so we just sort of got hit by it, and we didn't. We probably could have hung on and tried to find a way to make it work, but we both were just sort of tired of running a company and not having clients now. So we both went our separate ways there.
And did you start web development back then, or was it after that?
I first touched web development when I was at Tech. Actually, in my first year, there was a profile of X Windows that you could install on your account. That it was like a roaming account that followed you around to all the machines there. And it was called Triple X, and I have no idea why, still to this day. But this one guy kept telling me I should install Triple X and check it out. And I'm like, guy, you are weird. I'm not going to do this on these campus machines.
What are you trying to get? Where you've been? And
are you trying to get me in trouble here? And finally, he was like, no, let me show you. And he showed me his Triple X profile, which was just what they called like the X Windows profile. I have no idea why. And it came with Mosaic installed on it. And this was right after Mosaic came out. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, because I've been using Gopher and things like that to do, text-based web access already a little bit. On the Amiga 3000, I got to take that to college. So I got it hooked up to the internet. This computer from like 1991 or 90. I got a huge, gigantic networking board for it and got it hooked up to the internet. But yeah, and then when I saw that, I immediately wanted to make these things. These things were awesome. These pages with links and pictures. How did they get the pictures there? And the background images, these backgrounds with the repeating backgrounds, so awesome. No blinking, flashing, marquee scrolling stuff yet, unfortunately.
No, that came much later after Mosaic.
So yeah, and as part of the way that Tech set up our accounts, they were running like I don't know if it was Apache back then. I think it might have been actually, but they were running a web server there, and if you put documents in your home directory that were HTML, it would serve them out, and you just had this link like prism.gatech.edu/GT1329A was me /home.html, and there was my webpage on the internet.
Wow. And you knew it was a college website or college student website because it had a tilde in it. That was the clue early on.
Well, I mean, Yahoo started that way. I just missed the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I started working on it then, and I've really, even when I was doing other things professionally, I was doing the web stuff all along because I really enjoyed it.
Nice. And so you sort of stuck it out in web development when, in the early 2000s, when it was just painful there were too many browsers and not enough frameworks is kind of the way I've described it. I went back into sort of desktop development and server-side development because the client-side stuff was just making me crazy. But you stuck it out through this whole thing. Did you sort of see this maturation of the web that a lot of developers see today coming?
Oh, I wish. If I were that smart, I'd be a billionaire right now. All it was I think I just sort of got boiled slowly like a frog.
Sure.
And it didn't seem that bad to me because each extra thing that happened, it was just one more pain point added on to the ones that I already had internalized to the point that it just seemed normal to me.
Yeah, the devil and all that.
Yeah, like all the case statements to do completely different things for every single function for every single browser. I mean, it was just sort of normal to me, and it didn't really bother me that much.
That's
looking back. Yeah, of course, it's ridiculous, but
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't really like any sort of foresight that I can claim there. It was just that I enjoyed it, and again, it was just amazing that I got to get paid to do what I liked anyway.
That's awesome. And of course, the case statements are still there. They're just inside of jQuery or Angular.
True. Yeah.
Anyone who pretends that it's all okay today is deluding themselves. It's better, but
it's interesting. The Dave Methlin, the lead for the jQuery project now, he stated that there is more conditional sort of edge case bloat in jQuery for Android than there is for IE6 and IE7. So people think that, once the old browsers are gone, it's going to be fine. But no, I mean, we still are glossing over just a ton of weird edge cases in between the different browsers. We're just so lucky to have awesome frameworks and libraries to do it for us now.
Absolutely. And I've contended for a while that the Android 202122 browser is the worst browser that has ever been released. Worse than maybe
I've got a tweet that says like Android is the new IE6 from a couple of years ago. They got a zillion retweets. It was probably like one of the most popular things I've ever tweeted. Yeah, you're not alone
nice.
Thinking that.
It's just painful. Just painful. So did you embrace JavaScript as a language that you adore, or is it the monkey on your back that you have to carry with you everywhere? I mean, I kind of talk
a little bit of both.
JavaScript guys. They're, not that they don't know about the problems, but either they've embraced the quirkiness or they do it while gritting their teeth. And you think you're somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be the person to just pretend like JavaScript is amazing and everything about it's great. We all know its history of being invented in about a week, and it was some great stuff that just sort of got munged around, and this was the best he could do really quickly.
Yeah.
And I mean, things like not having not having a decimal number type, not having support for large numbers. I mean, that comes into play all the time. That's always a problem. Not having a date time literal, that's a huge pain.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Of course, there are pain points. But overall, I like it a lot. I love the functional nature of it. I enjoy that it's dynamic. And it's great that it's dynamic. And now you can sort of layer on something like TypeScript to make it behave a little bit more like a static language if you use tooling for it. Or
at least be able to check that language before you send it off into the browser, as it were. Yeah.
So I think really the ubiquity, though, the fact is there's no other language I can write my code in and have it run so many places, and that's worth it to me, to deal with some of the warts.
Yeah, I'm in the same place with it. For a long time, I was one of the snickering few because I sort of left web development and was like, JavaScript, it has the word script in it. How could it? How are you writing production code with a scripting language and all this? And had sort of my arrogance about it. But when I returned to it and someone taught me how to write JavaScript code, not how to write, whatever other languages I was doing in JavaScript, which was happening a lot with C# and happened a bit to me in Java, and even the C++ sort of ideas I was bringing to it always made really bad JavaScript code because I was taking too much of what I had in these other languages and trying to re-implement them in this other language that was just totally different, especially because of the dynamic nature of it.
Yeah, definitely. You see the classic mistake coming from C# is trying to use classical inheritance and those sort of patterns, and it just you end up with this verbose stuff that doesn't even really work as well as you wanted it to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think they hit that one point and then they go back. They say, "See, I was right. This is terrible." And
yeah,
it's an easy mistake to make because I still write a lot of C# code on the back end for API things and maintaining old projects. And definitely when I go back to using Visual Studio and C#, there are things about it that I really like. I still really like how well some parts of that work. So I definitely understand, why people would like to make JavaScript more like, a language like C# or why, CoffeeScript exists because people want JavaScript to be more like Ruby, things like that.
Absolutely. And do you find yourself, are you pretty well in the Node camp then, where JavaScript here and everywhere?
It's weird. I want to be, maybe, I think. I was a really big advocate for Node years ago, a couple of years ago, too, maybe even 3 years ago now. It's hard to remember.
Yeah.
I was always inside Microsoft, sending long emails to anyone who would listen, telling them that we've got to jump on this JavaScript on the server side thing. And, everyone would blow me off and tell me, no, that's not going to go anywhere. And I used Node a lot myself, especially once they had great Windows support. A couple of years ago.
Yeah, which
it was really, really great.
Yeah,
it did. Yeah, and to their credit, that happened because Microsoft helped them.
Yeah,
they worked together to make that happen. But the thing that I've run into is what I liked best about using JavaScript on the server side and anywhere, typically when I'm working with a UI, is its dynamic typing. Makes it really easy just to do UI stuff without all the ceremony of all the different types.
Yeah.
But these days, I don't really do any UI code on the server side at all. Very rare these days. Some sites do still need it, I guess, but a lot of the stuff I work on doesn't.
Yeah.
And at that point, Node is just not Node, but JavaScript is just a slower version of C# for me. It just means that I'm going to need more resources to run the same API. And so I found myself using it less than I expected I would be in 2014.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same place with it in that some of the early promise that I was attracted to, the idea of sharing code, server and client, especially things like validation. While it's true, the environments are so different between the client and server. And you know what version of JavaScript and what engine you're using on the server, and so you can sort of lean on that. But on the client, you still have to deal with the 14 different execution environments and speed of machines and all of that. And so crafting libraries or parts of the code that you're going to use and that you're going to use in an effective way on both sides becomes a challenge in itself. And at some point, it's not worth to me that extra effort. And so I tend to do kind of what you're at. I go back to, where I'm more comfortable with ASP.NET in the back end, just because I feel like I can put it together quicker because I know they're different environments.
Yeah. I think maybe if we're taking a longer view, it's probably going to be very similar to the situation that you described earlier about how web development was 15 to 12 to 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And right now we're in that phase of using JavaScript on both sides of the pipe. And it could be that eventually we're going to get these mature libraries that are going to make it super, super easy. Like Meteor is trying to do that. Derby, a few of these. I think there's Mojito from Yahoo. Yeah. There's several attempts to try to bridge the gap and let you write once and run the isomorphic JavaScript that they say.
Yeah.
And right now, I think you're totally right that it's not quite ready yet. It doesn't, and there's a lot of edge cases that no one's really taken care of. But eventually, you would think that that's going to mature to the point where the promise will be true. We'll see.
Yeah. And there's so much less on the server you need to worry about that it becomes less of an issue, for people that are coming sort of from web forms and the promise of, I can do it all at once. That's, I think, more attractive than a lot of people that are doing, whether it's Ruby or .NET or Java or Node on the back end, because most of the back end now ends up being, not all, but a majority of it ends up being exposing APIs, and then the shared becomes a much smaller surface area. It's not like you're generating views on both ends. I mean, I'm a fan of the hybrid approach where you're going to be generating views on the server and the client depending on your need, especially in the mobile scenarios. But, you're still doing most of it on the client, I think, in most cases.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if that hasn't just been us sort of swinging. So a lot of that, I think, is probably just developer productivity, right? That's what's easier for us to do. But if we had a really high level framework, let's say, I'll just use Meteor as an example because a lot of people have heard of it.
Yeah.
Like if you had a Meteor that could work so well that you essentially just wrote an Angular app the same way you would today for just the front end, but it worked on both the front end and the back end. Depending on your connection type, maybe it does something like Webpack does, where it sends down a static view first and then sends down some JavaScript later to make it start working right. If all of that could happen automatically, I bet everyone would jump right on board with that because why not? It's just going to be better.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that right now for sure.
No, not at all.
not even close. But I think if I had to guess about the future, your analogy about what sort of happened with libraries like jQuery, Prototype, MooTools that sort of brought us to this point. I think that could happen, for the things like Meteor and Derby that might do the same thing for server and client.
Well, we've sort of gone down more of the technical end of talking about your career, but I do want to ask your opinion about one thing because I'm really curious, and that is what you think about the forking of Node that's happened recently. Whether you think that's going to, empower or hinder Node futures.
I don't think it's a big deal. Okay. I think it's probably the same as, if you remember back in the 90s, there was like a new fork of Linux every 5 minutes, it seemed like. Everyone was arguing and trying to go a different direction. But it's already popular enough, and it's in so many large production implementations like Walmart, LinkedIn, places like that, that it's not going anywhere. And some critical mass of people are going to take the most popular fork of it, some direction. I don't think it's going anywhere at all. It just might have a different name. We'll see.
Yeah, you never know. That happens.
I think I prefer Node to IO.js. I don't like IO.js very much.
Yeah, me too.
They say it's named after the moon of Jupiter, but the first thing anyone's going to think is input-output. Yeah. And it's just confusing.
Yeah, and I think they want that sort of alliteration, but... yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there. So let's talk a little bit about, where you've come, in your career. Have you been basically a consultant since that first company, or have you actually taken jobs at a, place that you believed in and that sort of thing?
So I should have, as I was telling you about that company, I forgot that I remembered that I forgot. There was another job I had in high school that really is relevant.
Oh, really?
And that sort of got me going, where I am now. I worked there was a computer, like finally there was a computer store near my house by the time I was about to leave. And so I went and got a job there, a summer job, in the summer, I think after I graduated from high school, so 1994. And I worked there doing, so I was a full-time employee there, but I was doing, service calls to all their different clients to help them fix problems, mostly just IT stuff. But every once in a while I got to work on a little bit of programming sort of, around the corner, where I was really supposed to be there to work on one thing, but the guys knew that I also knew how to fix, coding bugs, and they would get me to come in the other room real quick and take a look at something.
Yeah.
Which was,
that was here.
What an awesome ego boost. I'm 17, and these old guys wearing suits are asking me to help them with their computer code. But so I did that, and then sort of naturally after that was over at the end of the summer, it was really natural for me to sort of branch out into continuing to do that for other people. I obviously I didn't try to steal any of those clients from that company, but down at Tech, I would run into people who needed help, and when the topic came up, I would be like, oh, hey, I could come help you for X dollars an hour, because I was already used to doing that, at the company. And so I actually built up probably, I would say at least 75% of the business that we started with at the company we built, my friend and I built together. It was small jobs like that we sort of just rolled into real clients. And then after that didn't work out, I just kept doing that. I just kept doing independent consulting work on the side.
Until it wasn't on the side.
Well, so the interesting thing was, I thought it was just going to be on the side, but it was only on the side. That's all I needed. There was so much work. Everyone always asks me, where do you find your clients? How aren't you worried you're not going to have enough work? And really the thing is, it's the opposite problem. There's so much work out there that it's overwhelming. I say no way more than I say yes, even before anyone knew who I was. I'm very, very lucky now to sort of have a little bit of a web presence, and a few people know my name. But even before that, there was no trouble at all finding clients.
Yeah, when I talk to people who are, have always had a job, as it were, in this business, and they'll often ask me about, I'm thinking about going independent, and I'm kind of in your same place. The most important thing you do is the client you turn down, not worried about getting enough work, but not taking the wrong client, the client that's going to eat you alive or ask you for things you can't deliver in the time, or this is only a 10-hour project and it ends up being a 2-year project. Those are the ones you want to hopefully sniff out and not do, right? The ones that are just going to make you sorry you ever took them as a client. Yeah,
that's by far the worst thing I ever did was right after our company ended. And I obviously came out of that without really any significant savings or anything, because the company would have ended otherwise.
Right.
So I was really desperate just to take whatever work I could find. The first person that said, we'll give you $5, I took it. Right. And, I went on, I can't remember the name of the site now. They've changed so much, but one of those freelancer sites where you just sort of compete to see who can have the cheapest price to build the whole world. And I did a couple of jobs on there, probably knowing in the back of my head that I'm underbidding and this is going to be really difficult. How am I ever going to get this done for $600? It's like 2 weeks worth of work or something like that. And so I had a really bad experience with, I think, one or two of them. And then I was really lucky with a third one who was able to identify that I was doing good work, but that obviously it was going to take a lot longer, but that it was going to be worth me putting a lot of time in it for them. And they actually, I wouldn't say mentored me, but they accidentally taught me a lot about, look, these clients, they're going to take the pushback from you, and you tell them, I'm going to build you exactly what you want at the quality that you want, close to the time you want, but it's going to cost a lot more money because I'm going to have to put a ton of work into this. And the good clients will say, oh, that's fine. We just didn't know how much it was going to cost or something like that. And so I stopped being scared to ask for, either as much money as I needed or as much time as it was going to take. I started being really honest with people. And like you said, weeding out the people who were just unrealistic and not willing to, adjust, their expectations.
Yeah.
And that has been, huge for me because now I love all my clients. All my clients are the greatest. I can't I hear stories about bad clients, and I feel really lucky to work with the clients that I do, because they are all just fantastic. And I think it's partially because, I try to look for people like that are realistic and, will take that feedback about, when they have expectations that aren't going to be realistic.
Yeah, because ultimately, you're going to end up, paying the price for that bad decision. They don't know in some cases, of course they know, but in many cases, they just don't know how much the stuff's going to be. And if you're too timid to tell them, wait, what you're asking for is not what you want, or what you think this is going to take 10 hours there's no chance it's going to take 10 hours. And I think a lot of developers, especially people who are going independent, are so afraid of, maintaining enough work that they're also afraid to raise their rate. Because then they don't really know what they're worth. But I'm getting 60 hours a week, at $55 an hour, and so I can pay my bills. That's great. If I raise it, I won't have as many hours. But they haven't done the math yet to figure out.
It's so important because it means that you can work harder and more focused for your clients if you're getting paid more per hour. B, people typically respect your opinion and work on a more peer-to-peer basis with you the more you charge. If you're charging $15 an hour, they're just not going to respect you. Why should they? And 3, it helps to weed out some of those clients that are unrealistic or are just going to be a pain. Someone who's paying you $200 an hour is typically going to be invested in the project, and they're going to respect your time. And not we just want you to be in this meeting because it's not it does cut that out too. That's a great point.
Which is huge for productivity if you want to actually write code for a living and not sit in meetings for a living. Well, this has been great. I have one last question I like to ask everybody, and that is, if you look back at your career, at what you've done so far, there any point when you would have made a different decision, looked at a different technology, bought that Yahoo stock when you first heard about it? Any decision that you think you would make a different decision about?
Well, yeah, lots and lots and lots. There's probably a million decisions I would change if I could. Maybe, I don't know. The learning experience from all of them has been very helpful. I think probably I would have, if I had the choice, I probably would have never focused at all on hardware and focused just solely on software, and gotten really, really good at that instead of just sort of good at everything.
Well, I can see that. Yeah. Though, arguably you're really good at software.
I'm okay. I'm better at talking about software, it seems like, sometimes, than I am doing it.
But that's not the reputation you have.
But I don't know. I mean, it's tough because I've, for example, something that comes to mind to me often is just missed opportunities, right? I think I wish that I had been louder sooner. Because a lot of the good opportunities I've had in the past few years, that would be it, definitely. I would suggest that everyone be as loud as they can, as soon as they can. Don't be shy about it. Don't think that you don't have anything to share. Because I know for a fact, looking back, that there was tons and tons and tons of stuff that I could have been putting out there publicly many years before I did, that were, at least as good as the stuff that I've gotten a little bit of, traffic for. Because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be great quality. You don't have to be a genius. All you have to do is just, put the information out there, and it is so rewarding.
Yeah.
I wish that back when I was doing Ajax in, the 1989 and 1990, I wish that I had posted about that and called it Ajax before the other guy did several years later. Things like that. I mean, I think that probably most of the people listening to this who do not have a blog or, do not post answers on Stack Overflow or whatever, probably could contribute really quality stuff. And it just enriches your career. And, as I mean, just the satisfaction of helping people learn something. And when they tell you that, I get this now, I mean, it's just an amazing feeling. I think everyone should jump out there and any information you have, do it. I wish I had done it much, much sooner.
The smallest sharing of what you've learned by what you're doing, because we're learning all the time. It's not about quantity. A lot of people are like, well, I could never tweet as much as you do, and I'm like, you really shouldn't. No, I shouldn't be tweeting. But that once a week nugget that someone puts out is on Twitter or once a month, 200-word blog post. When someone needs it, it's so crucial. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I was just listening to a clip from Ira Glass, who does the This American Life podcast, and he was talking about how everyone who ever does anything of quality usually starts early, and they know, and they're putting things out there, they're just doing as much as they can, but they know at the time that what they're doing is not good quality. They have enough taste to understand that I wish this was better, but they keep doing it anyway. And that's the only way that you get to the point where you do the thing that you think is as good as you could do, is you have to work at it for years and years and years, doing stuff that's not quite as good, iterating, failing, figuring out what works. You're never going to be able to put it out there perfect. You're not going to be, Scott Gu or Scott Hanselman or something on day one. You have to work at it for 10 plus years like they did before you sort of get to the point where you can put those things out there as polished as they do.
Yeah.
So the only way to get there is to start today, doing just the best you can.
Just the best you can. Well, that's great advice. I really appreciate you being on the show. And of course, we'll get a checkout. Oh, wait, no, we don't pay for these things. That's right.
Well, you know what? It's just like how I got into computers. Doing what I love and getting paid for it sometimes is awesome, but I would do it anyway. And this was a fun conversation, and you definitely wouldn't have to pay me for it. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. And we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Hello World podcast. Remember,